neighborhood lunatic. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. It was just another quiet evening in our peaceful suburban neighborhood, or so I thought. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights flickered to life, casting a dim glow on the quiet streets lined with identical houses. I had just finished dinner and was settling in to watch a movie when I heard the distant sound of sirens. Living in a safe neighborhood, the sound of sirens was a rarity. My curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to step outside and see what was happening. As I made my way down the porch steps, I noticed my neighbors had gathered in a hushed group near the end of the street. As I walked over to join them, I hoped to find out what had prompted this giant gathering. As I approached, Mrs. Henderson, who lived a few houses down, turned to me with tears in her eyes. She was gripping her husband's arm, trembling. "It's happened again," she whispered. I didn't understand. "What happened?" I asked. My heart was racing too. Mr. Henderson took a deep breath before he spoke. "There's a serial killer on the loose, right here in our neighborhood." My heart seemed to drop. It couldn't be true. Our neighborhood was known for its safety, and the idea of a serial killer lurking among us was unthinkable. The police had arrived by then, and an officer stepped forward to address the crowd. He confirmed what Mr. Henderson had said. A serial killer had been active in our neighborhood for weeks, targeting unsuspecting victims in their own homes. The entire community was on high alert with increased police patrols, but the killer remained elusive. Fear gripped me as I rushed back to my house, locking every door and window. The sense of security I'd always had and felt in my own home was shattered. I couldn't sleep that night, and my mind was racing with images of a faceless killer stalking the streets outside, even potentially my house. The next morning, news of another murder spread like wildfire. The victim was a neighbor just a few houses away from mine. Panic had set in, and the community meetings grew in size and intensity. We formed neighborhood watch groups and started taking turns patrolling those streets at night, armed with flashlights and phones ready to dial 911 at the slightest hint of trouble. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in our once tranquil neighborhood was now palpable. The serial killer continued to evade capture, leaving us all in a state of constant fear and paranoia. I found it increasingly difficult to trust even the most familiar faces. Then, one night, as I was on patrol with my neighbors, we spotted a shadowy figure lurking near the bushes of a neighbor's yard. Our hearts raced as we cautiously approached, our flashlights trembling in our hands. The figure turned, and in the dim light, I caught a glimpse of a man's face. Before I could react, he bolted, disappearing into the darkness. We gave chase, of course, with our adrenaline-fueled pursuit taking us through the labyrinth streets of our own neighborhood. Our breaths grew short as we chased the person through the streets. Then, as the police arrived, they apprehended the suspect. It turned out to be a homeless man who had been seeking shelter in our neighborhood. He had no connection to the serial killings. We never caught that man, and the nightmare that had descended upon our once peaceful neighborhood continued to haunt us. To this day, the memory of that terrifying encounter with the faceless killer lingers, and it's a reminder that he could be anywhere. My neighbor's keeper. It was a chilly autumn evening, and the leaves rustled underfoot as I walked home from work. The city streets were dimly lit by the street lamps, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the wind. Little did I know, that night would become a nightmare etched into my memory forever. I just moved into a new apartment in the heart of the city, thinking it would be an exciting change from my previous suburban life. The first few weeks were uneventful, and I had been settling in nicely. But all that changed one evening as I entered the corridor leading to my apartment. The lights in the hallway flickered erratically, giving me a weird feeling. My footsteps echoed as I walked down the narrow hallway, passing closed doors that concealed the lives of my neighbors. I'd seen some of them in passing, nodding politely, but I didn't know anyone well. As I approached my apartment door, I noticed a faint, metallic scent in the air, like blood. And if you're asking how I know that, I work in the medical field, so it was pretty common. I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me and fumbled for my keys to unlock the door. Inside my apartment, I tried to shake off the unease, attributing it to the stress of adapting to city life. I decided to take a relaxing bath to calm my nerves, but as I soaked in the warm water, I heard a muffled, chilling sound from the adjacent apartment. It was like a stifled cry for help, followed by silence. My heart raced as I wrapped myself in a towel and quietly stepped out of the bathroom. I strained my ears, but the silence was oppressive. I considered calling the police, but what if it was just a misunderstanding? What if I was overreacting? Tentatively, I approached the wall shared with my neighbor's apartment, pressing my ear against it. The faintest of whispers reached my ears, the words indecipherable. Fear clenched my chest as I realized something was terribly wrong next door. Summoning all my courage, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me that help was on the way and instructed me to stay in my apartment. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. The feeling in the hallway, the metallic scent, and the unsettling silence weighed on me like a crushing nightmare. Finally, the distant wail of sirens signaled the arrival of the police. They stormed into my neighbor's apartment, breaking down the door. I couldn't see what was happening, but the tension in the air was suffocating. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged with a man in handcuffs, his face contorted with anger and desperation. The police informed me that my neighbor had been a serial killer, responsible for a string of disappearances throughout the city. My call had saved a potential victim from a gruesome fate. That night, I sat in my lit living room of the apartment, and I couldn't shake the horror of what had transpired. The realization that I'd been living next to a killer, hearing the cries of a victim through my walls, it haunted me forever. Emergency. It was a cool, clear evening, and I'd just finished a late shift at the hospital. The journey home was one I'd taken countless times before, but that night, it took a chilling turn. As I made my way through the quiet, dimly lit streets, the only sounds were the occasional passing car and the distant hum of the city. The sidewalk beneath my feet felt cold and uneven, casting strange shadows in the moonlight. I lived alone in a modest apartment and in a quiet neighborhood, and I usually felt safe walking home, even at this late hour. But as I approached the entrance to my building, something felt off. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a sense of unease settled in my gut. I scanned the vicinity, my eyes darting from one shadow to the next, but nothing seemed out of place. My building's entrance was just ahead, so I picked up my pace, eager to reach the safety of my apartment. As I fumbled for my keys, I heard a shuffling sound behind me, like footsteps on the pavement. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was no one in sight. The silence was unnerving. I quickened my steps, my heart pounding, and finally, I managed to unlock the building's door and slip inside. I rushed towards the elevator, desperate to get to my floor and lock myself in. But just as I reached for the button, I heard it, a soft, sinister chuckle from the shadow behind me. I turned, my heart in my throat, and there he was. A man dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by a hood. In his hand, he held a knife, its blade reflecting the dim light. I froze. My mind raced as the realization dawned on me that I was about to die. He advanced slowly, his footsteps echoing within the confined space. Panic coursed through my veins, but I knew I had to think fast. Without a second thought, I slammed my hand on the elevator button and darted inside just as the doors closed, leaving the man outside. The elevator ride felt agonizingly slow, but eventually it reached my floor. I burst out into the hallway, stumbling towards my apartment door. Once inside, I locked the door and called the police, my voice quivering as I recounted what had just happened. The police arrived quick, but when they searched the building and the surrounding area, the man was gone without a trace. They assured me they'd increase patrols in the area and urged me to stay vigilant and call them if I needed anything. That night, I couldn't sleep, and in general, I had a bad time sleeping for the rest of the year. The fact that that man had gotten into my building made me feel like my home wasn't safe anymore.